A cursed doll trapped a powerful evil for 1,000 years until a reporter accidentally breaks it, setting the dark force free. Strange miracles start happening, but soon turn into terrifying events. Watch the video till the end. In 1845, a woman named Mary Elner is accused of being a witch and is hanged from a tree. The locals put a mask on her face and set her on fire, while a priest chants a spell while holding a doll. Hours later, her charred body still hangs from the tree. In present-day Massachusetts, a disgraced journalist named Jerry visits a farmer who says his cow has been marked by a cult. When Jerry looks closer, he realizes it's actually the Metallica logo, probably drawn by the farmer's son. Just then, Jerry hears a strange whisper and approaches a tree, where something catches his eye. He reaches inside the tree and pulls out a burnt doll with a tag that says February 31st. 1845, the farmer mentions that it's common for field workers to bury dolls for luck, but none ever look like this. Sensing a spooky story, Jerry smashes the doll's head and stages a scene where the farmer finds it, taking pictures for his article. Later that night, while driving out of town and drinking, Gary almost hits a girl named Alice but swerves just in time. His car crashes, but he's unharmed. Stepping out of the car, he notices something moving in the shadows. It's Alice. Jerry follows her into the woods until they reach the tree from earlier. Alice kneels and repeatedly says, "I pledge my soul to you." When Gary touches her shoulder, she faints. He brings her back to town and learns she lives with her uncle, Father Hagen. Again calls Dr. Natalie, who checks on Alice and confirms she wasn't physically hurt. She also reveals that Alice is deaf-mute. Jerry is confused because he heard her speak, but Natalie blames his drinking. While waiting for his car to be repaired, Jerry stays in a local motel. He visits Hagen's church and notices Alice staring at a statue of Mary. Alice hears a female voice calling her name and, as if in a trance, walks out of the church, followed by other young girls in a line. Everyone else follows too, and Gary starts recording with his camera. Alice leads them to the tree and sees a vision of Mary. She shocks everyone by speaking, saying she heard the voice of Mary, who wants them to return to the tree the next day. Afterward, Natalie runs tests on Alice, who is excited to find out she can now hear. That night, Gary has a nightmare about a red sky, the doll breaking, and a ghostly woman crawling out of a red creek. He wakes up when water drips on his face, noticing mold covering the ceiling. The next day, all the locals gather at the tree again, and Gary records everything. Hagen tries to keep Alice at home, but she goes to the tree and sees another vision of Mary. She then approaches a paraplegic boy and tells him to have faith because Mary commands him to walk. To everyone's amazement, the boy stands up and walks. Jerry films this as everyone falls to their knees in prayer. Meanwhile, inside the church, the statue of Mary starts crying blood. The miracle goes viral, attracting attention from around the world. The Vatican sends Bishop Giles and Monsignor Delgard to investigate whether Alice's actions were a real miracle or a hoax. During a press conference, the priests explain the 3 steps needed to confirm a miracle. The illness must be incurable, the cure must be instantaneous, and the cure must be complete. Alice attends the conference but is overwhelmed by the rude questions from reporters. Jerry steps in and asks gentle, respectful questions, so Alice only answers him. While the investigation continues, a shelter is built around the tree to protect it in case it becomes a shrine. Father Hagen inspects the area and discovers the burnt doll buried near the tree, which causes a terrifying ghost to appear. Just as the creature is about to attack, more people show up, causing the ghost to vanish. Hagen returns inside, interrupting Jerry's interview with Alice. He suddenly has a severe coughing fit due to his lung disease but ignores it and lights a cigarette. While doing so, he scolds Gary for using Alice for fame. Hagen, cautious, believes this attention could harm Alice, reminding Gary that wherever there's a shrine, the devil builds a chapel nearby. He warns that those who have witnessed Mary in the past were often treated as freaks, sent to convents, or dead within months, and he doesn't want Alice to face the same fate. Later that night, Gary is back at the motel and hears unsettling whispers behind him. He doesn't see anyone in the hallway, but when he turns around, a hooded figure appears. The following day, Alice is practicing singing with Hagen while Gary and Delgard watch. Suddenly, Hagen has another violent coughing episode and collapses. As Gary calls for an ambulance, Alice asks Hagen to pledge his soul to Mary. She then places her hand on his chest, stopping his cough. Hagen is thrilled to find he can breathe easily again, but he's startled to see a dark figure behind Alice reaching toward him. Afterward, they visit the hospital where Natalie shows them 2 x-rays, one from a few days earlier and a new one. It's clear that Hagen's lung disease has mysteriously disappeared. Natalie also confirms that the paraplegic boy who was healed is now completely fine. Delgard and Giles have no choice but to declare these events a true miracle. Soon, the tree where it all started becomes a shrine, and Alice goes viral, drawing tourists from across the country. People start calling Alice a hero, and she gains a large following, even getting her own Wikipedia page. Someone even predicts she'll become more famous than Taylor Swift. However, some remain skeptical, with one man deciding to leave town with his family, believing that when God shows up on Earth, it's often a sign of impending disaster. As more reporters surround Alice's house, making life unbearable, Hagen decides to send her to a diocese in Boston for her safety. Later, while smoking in the church, Hagen notices his cigarette smoke moving oddly. He follows the trail to a hole in the wall where he finds a notebook outlining a ritual to seal the devil using a mask and a doll. Unseen, something watches him from the shadows. Meanwhile, Gary is having dinner with Natalie and mentions the doll he saw. Natalie explains that those dolls are made to trap stop evil, marked with the impossible date of February 31st to keep them sealed forever. Afterward, they take a walk, and Gary is startled to recognize a creek from his dreams. Natalie tells him that the church once owned most of the town, and Gary surprises her by correctly guessing the date -1845. Checking the water, Gary sees the ghost from his dream leap at him. When he turns, he almost sees Natalie as the ghost, which makes him suspicious. He decides they need to speak with Hagen. At the same time, Hagen hears chains in the church and sees someone enter the confessional. He goes in and starts listening to a woman's confession. At first, it's typical, but then her voice becomes eerie as she admits to destroying many lives and reveals she's there for him. She says Satan gave her power and that she healed Hagen, but she's angry that he doubts her. As the lights flicker, she continues describing how she killed anyone who tried to stop her. Terrified, Hagen leaves the confessional and hears the organ playing on its own. He then sees a dark, hooded ghost with a rope around her shoulders in the church. Hagen tries to flee, but the ghost blocks his way and attacks him. By the time Gary arrives, he hears a noise coming from the confessional, but when he opens it, there's nothing there. Suddenly, a body appears hanging by a rope behind him, and Jerry is horrified to see Hagen dead. After the paramedics take Hagen's body away, Giles asks Gary to keep Hagen's death a secret, as revealing it could damage the community's trust in the church. Jerry is still not convinced that Hagen took his own life. The next day, he goes to visit Alice and brings up how Hagen believed that the evil spirit always followed him. Alice assures him that Mary would never let that happen. Later that evening, back at the motel, Gary notices the lights flickering again and hears the same eerie whispers. This time, he catches a glimpse of the ghost at the end of the hallway, but it vanishes within seconds. Reviewing his interview footage later, Gary spots something strange, a blurry figure near Alice. He slows down the video and is shocked to see the ghost moving on the paused footage before disappearing. As Gary leans in closer to inspect, the ghost suddenly jumps out at him, only to vanish again. The next day, during Hagen's funeral, Jerry talks to Natalie, who also can't believe that Hagen would take his own life. Together, they search the church's basement and find Hagen's hidden notebook, which reveals information about Mary Elner. Mary could supposedly heal the sick and claimed that the Virgin Mary spoke through her, but anyone who doubted her would die mysteriously. In 1845, the townspeople turned against her, accusing her of serving Satan. They drowned her in a creek until she confessed, then nailed a mask of the Virgin Mary to her face and burned her alive. They sealed her ashes and soul inside a doll, the same doll Gary had accidentally broken. After Mary's death, everyone she had healed became sick again. Gary realizes that Mary Elner, not the Virgin Mary, is speaking to Alice. He also figures out that the ghost killed Hagen because he discovered the truth in the notebook. Meanwhile, Alice interrupts the mass for her uncle, announcing that Mary wants everyone to gather at the shrine for a special service that night. Back with Gary, he notices a sheet moving but only finds an old statue of Jesus underneath. Suddenly, another sheet drops, and the ghost reveals itself, attempting to attack them. The light bulb shatters during the struggle, and Jerry and Natalie barely escape. They try to warn Alice, but Delgard is already taking her away to avoid a crowd. Jerry and Natalie drive to Boston. Natalie heads to the convent to look for Alice, while Gary confronts Giles and Delgard with the truth he found in Hagen's notebook. Giles already knows, but never told Delgard, who is shocked. Despite Gary's protests, Giles insists they go ahead with the service, saying that a centuries-old diary isn't enough proof. At the convent, the nuns refuse to let Natalie see Alice. Meanwhile, Jerry visits the diocese's archives and learns that Mary Elner had a child before she died and made a deal with the devil to live on through her descendants, meaning Alice carries her bloodline. Suddenly, Gary's phone loses signal, and the files on Mary's confession start to melt. A statue of the Virgin Mary begins to crack, revealing the ghost. Jerry tries to block her path by throwing a table, but the ghost simply pushes it away and teleports in front of him. Delgard arrives just in time and begins an exorcism, but the ghost washes the words from his Bible. Despite this, Delgard continues using a crucifix and the ghost finally vanishes. Delgard then agrees to help Gary stop the service before Alice can take everyone's souls. That evening, merchandising stands pop up near the shrine, selling items related to Alice's miracles. A large crowd gathers at the shrine, and even more people are watching the event online. Inside the church, Gary and Natalie watch as Delgard starts a ritual using the doll, trying to trap the ghost again. But each time he strikes a match, the ghost puts it out. Suddenly, a tall flame erupts and spreads to the cross on the wall, which falls and kills Delgarde. His body catches fire as the statues around them begin to cry blood. At the shrine, Alice's eyes change as she prepares to take everyone's souls. Just in time, Jerry and Natalie rush in. In desperation, Gary claims that he faked all the miracles. Natalie, using sign language, tries to tell Alice that Mary is a demon, not a saint. As Gary fabricates a story about how he staged the miracles, he also says that Hagen took his own life and that Giles told him to cover it up. Natalie tells Alice that Mary killed Hagen, which causes Alice to start doubting everything. The crowd, however, becomes angry and protests against Jerry's claims. At that moment, Mary commands Alice to finish the service or she will never speak to her again. Realizing she's been manipulated, Alice declares to everyone that Mary isn't real. The crowd turns on her, insulting her, but then the tree and its decorations catch fire. Panic ensues as everyone tries to flee. The boy who had been healed can no longer walk, and Natalie rushes to rescue him. The flames intensify as the ghost emerges from the tree, making the fire even worse. She removes her mask, revealing her burned face, and touches Giles, instantly burning him to death. Jerry and Alice try to escape, but the ghost repeatedly blocks their path. The ghost burns Gary's hand and leg before preparing to finish him off, but Alice steps in and takes the attack instead. The ghost's creepy hand injures Alice's chest, killing her. Since Alice was Mary's last descendant, the spirit can no longer survive and fades away, screaming as she vanishes. Jerry, devastated, holds holds Alice's lifeless body and prays for mercy. Miraculously, Alice is revived. Sometime later, Gary, Natalie, and Alice visit Hagen's grave. Alice, now unable to speak, uses sign language to communicate, and Jerry's learning sign language to talk with her. Inside the church, a statue of the Virgin Mary is seen crying blood once again. Subscribe for popcorn. We are racing towards 500 subscribers.